人の運命を司る何らかの超越的な律、神の手が存在するのだろうか。少なくとも人は自らの意志さえこの運命を司る何らかの超越的な
What the hell was that?
神の手が存在するのだろうか。
Where did that come from? So, if you're like me, you've watched an epic amount of shows, both live action.
Want any fries with that?
You sure you got my order?
Don't worry about it. Want any fries?
No.
And cartoons.
That was ticklish.
Hey! Mitzi's ticklish too.
I'm not ticklish. Oh, yeah.
Population 20,001. I guess the one is me. That's me. Hey!
Where Disney really wasn't making TV shows, but movies, and Nickelodeon was making hit after hit, both live action and cartoon shows. Nickelodeon shows that are in the late 90s era that I'm going to be using as a time frame reference is shows like Doug, Little Bear, all that. Blue's Clues was getting released around this time. And then we have some Disney Channel shows that we can think of. Wasn't as big yet. They became more of a thing more in the later 2000s. So one of the more well-known shows that we all know is like Even Stevens that came out in 2000. Something while I was making this video I remembered is that there's a lot of things that I forgot to mention, like Power Rangers. Power Rangers was a very influential show to me because I remember even when I was like 5 years old, I got a red Power Ranger stuffed thing for Christmas, and that was something I played with over and over and over until it broke. That was released in 1993. There were also these two production companies that were a lot more popular and more mainstream in the past. We've got Rankin Bass, which made a lot of stop motion movies, and they made some cartoon movies. So they have things that I remember are things like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, Jack Frost, and they even made The Hobbit. So they have a lot of different movies, and that's all Rankin and Bass. Then we have Hanna-Barbera that a lot more people are familiar with, especially because they're the ones that made Scooby-Doo. They also made the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and plenty of others that I don't have time to talk about. Another honorable mention for me is Street Sharks. I remember that show was very influential to me, and I had my mom make me a costume for Halloween one year to be a street shark. And that's kind of in that same vein of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So all these different cartoons were still coming out around this time, but it wasn't Disney making these. It was all those different companies like Hanna-Barbera and Rankin Bass, and then Nickelodeon. So just to kind of put a time frame on what was going on during the time when anime and manga became really big. Around that time, you're watching all those different shows. You're maybe even playing some video games like Super Nintendo, Nintendo even, or Sega. Then the N64 just got released in 96, this time frame, I should say. But then, somehow, you learned about Pokemon, and that was on Kids WB. That was a program back then by Warner Brothers. And this was around April 1st, 1999. And I would have been 8 years old around that time, because right now I'm 33. So it's been a long time. But when we all watched that, that was a huge turning point in our culture. I remember even my brothers found me somewhere in my house and they said, "Hey Josh, you got to go watch this show. This show is going to be so different than any American show. It's a Japanese cartoon." So I was intrigued. I had no idea, so I was just ready to watch. And I don't know, it was just so engaging, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And we all fell down that rabbit hole. And we probably watched some other series. But we also played their video games. Because Pokemon first was a video game before it was an anime, surprisingly enough. But we all watched different series like Dragon Ball, DBZ, Yu Yu Hakusho, Yu-Gi-Oh! And a lot of shows I'm leaving out. So these are all like 95 to 2001. But now we found ourselves as adults, and we still have this desire to go out into these places of fantasy we experienced in our youth. And Japan has different things. And what started it was magazine publications to do just that. Now throughout this video, we are going to be looking at these main points to help guide us through our precious and often misunderstood passion from where it came from. So the things we'll be talking about are: what is manga? How did this become a thing? What are manga magazines? What kinds are there? And how did we get the manga anime here? So what is manga? How did it become a thing? Well, it's sort of up for debate on which came first, the manga or the comics, as we know in America. They both share that they are an artistic form of storytelling that has engaged and hooked its readers for as early as the time before the World War II era, so before 1945. But all the stuff we know and love comes from time after that, so like 1940s and beyond. So the word manga comes from two Japanese kanji. The first kanji, man, meaning whimsical or impromptu, and ga, meaning pictures. The same term is the root of all the other languages that use this similar word manga. Like for Korean, it's manhwa with the HWA, and then it has the same root, MAN. Just like Chinese has manhua, has the same root, MAN. So all the different languages have that same root part, man, but they all change the ending part. Like in Chinese, they have HUA. In Korea, they have HWA. And even in French, they call it manfra. They have FRA at the end. But they're all the same thing, just different word for it. But what's interesting is that in Japan, manga refers to all sorts of cartooning, comics, and animation. So they are very loose with their use of the word. In English-speaking countries, manga has the stricter meaning of Japanese comics specifically. And that's used in parallel at the same time with the word anime, which means Japanese cartoons that are on the TV. So the term animanga is also used to describe how comics produced from animation cells. So there's an exchange back and forth. You can make books from shows, and you can make shows from books. So how did we get manga and anime here? So just to kind of note too, before we have these big overarching series that have a lot of drama and philosophical narratives embedded in them, we have the similar things that we see in newspapers in America. They have the same comic strips that we have in our newspapers. They have those same types of entertainment strips, but it has the very short story, has that nice punchline or whatever you're trying to say. So they have those same kind of originations that we have. But now to get into how it became what we know today, there's two people that I need to talk about. First is Osamu Tezuka, and then there's Machiko Hasegawa. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Osamu. So this is the person that is called a father of anime and manga. He began publishing more drawn-out stories that resulted in some of the most notable series that began the culture of anime and manga as we know it today. For example, he published the well-known Astro Boy in 1951 through 1968 in Shonen magazine. Now, I could get into all of the different levels of production and how the first series didn't actually come over here. We got the remake with the color version because there was a black and white version of Astro Boy.
There you go, Astro Boy, on your flight into space, rocking on through the stars, for adventures soon you will make. Astro Boy bombs away on your mission today. Here's the countdown and the blast of everything is go Astro Boy.
And all the different productions of the comic strip or the series manga. So that's a lot of stuff I could get into, but we're going to go into what was the time, like the culture like then. So remember, so this was that time frame, 1951, 1968. That's when Astro Boy was being developed and created and published and all that. And then it would be made into an anime. So remember, this was the time after World War II. Japanese artists subsequently gave life to their own style during the occupation and post-occupation years. So like from before occupation, 1945, and post-occupation, 1952, and onward to like 1972. When a previously militarist and ultra-nationalist Japan was rebuilding its political and economic infrastructure. Although Allied occupation censorship policies specifically prohibited art and writing that glorified war and Japanese militarism, those policies did not prevent the publication of other kinds of material, including manga. Furthermore, the 1947 Japanese Constitution, Article 21, prohibited all forms of censorship, which led to growth of artistic creativity. Tezuka and Hasegawa were both stylistic innovators. In Tezuka's more cinema-like technique, where the panels are in this motion picture that reveals details of action, bordering on slow motion, as well as rapid zooms from distance to close-up shots. So a lot of like changes from close to far and different perspectives. So more critically, he synchronized the placement of the panel where the reader's viewing speed to simulate moving pictures. This kind of visual dynamism was widely adopted by later manga artists, which we all know and love today, and a lot of our different series we read. So now I'm going to transition to Hasegawa. And she's what gave rise to this empowered woman trope we see in anime and manga. So the series that she is more well known for is Sase-san, which is Miss Sase. And that was commenced in 1946. And she was a young artist who made her debut with this heroine as a stand-in for millions of Japanese citizens, especially women, who were rendered homeless by the war. So if you compare this to Astro Boy, it's not as dramatic or action-oriented as Astro Boy, but Sase does not face an easy or simple life. Sase was also very relative, or people could relate to her because she was deeply involved in her immediate and extended family. She also was a very strong character, in striking contrast to the officially sanctioned Neo-Confucianist principles of feminine meekness and obedience to the good wife, wise mother, stereotype or thing that was taught by the previous military regime. Sase faces the world with a cheerful resilience, what psychologist Hayao Kawai calls a woman of endurance. Sase-san sold more than 62 million copies over the next half century. So now we're going to start getting into the history of manga. And we begin to see the building differentiation of genres. One of a more militaristic fantasy, wherein the male population gravitates towards, and the more slice of life struggles, wherein the female population gravitates towards. These are not strictly defined, but these are the general numbers that tend to buy or read these. Where we now know as shonen, which is for boys, and shojo, which is for girls. Again, not strictly speaking. So now we're moving into what are manga magazines? What kinds are there? So this is where manga, or tankobons as the more technical term, come from. This is the tankobon meaning standalone book, which is those series and those collected books. So starting out, these are in printed magazines, such as one that's really well known is the Weekly Shonen Jump, which is still around today. These magazines are printed on cheap newspaper print and are in a similar fashion disposable like newspapers, using black and white paper. What's funny is most Japanese people call these comics. If you were to say it like them, they would say komiksu. I'm butchering that for sure, which we still call it manga, but they just call it comics basically. Kind of funny, I thought. The term also comes from the format itself. So this is more of a nitty-gritty kind of thing, but it's still interesting enough. So a comic collection in a trade paperback size. So this is around 5 by 7 inch book. And I might even show some pictures here of the different sizes, as opposed to the larger 7 by 10 inch format used by traditional graphic novels. And there's another example there. Although Japanese manga tankobon may be in various sizes, which I'm going to go through here very shortly. But the most common are in this B6 format, which is about 5 inches by 7 inches. And there's also the other common one of 5.8 inches by 8 inches. And there's some, little decimals in there too. So I'm going to go through all these different types of tankobon. So there are different types of tankobon or manga. So first we have isobon, which also used to be known as kansenban, which is a complete edition. Includes basically everything pertaining to the series, whatever or wherever it's been published, with the original color and style, and includes things that might have been omitted from other formats. It's generally in an A5 style, so that's like 5.8 by 8.3 inches. This is your collector's edition. Then you got the Goka Isoban, which is another level up from an Isoban, because you can see it's Goka Isoban. It's a special luxury collector's edition. For example, I think of like Berserk, that recent re-release where they have the leather-bound manga. That one's like a luxury, very well-bound book. So then we have Bunkobon, which is not to be confused with their Bunkobon, which is more of their books. Books are Bunkobon, and then you have the manga, which are Bunkobon. These are the thicker tankobon, which is usually a reprint, meaning it's already been out and printed in smaller collections. So this is still in that smaller A6 style, so like 4.1 by 5.8 inches, but it's thicker than a usual tankobon. And I'll have a picture on the screen showing an example of that, because this series would have been originally like 4 different mangas, or 6, and now it's collected into 2. So then we also have Shinsoban, an edition similar to Kansenban, but is more of a re-release and not as thorough, but will still include some bonus materials and information somewhere inside the book. And then we have Shoshuen, which is a special collector re-released edition that makes the pages larger. So I have this other series like Sekirei, was originally released in 19 volumes, but now this Shoshushen is a 10-volume release, but it's also bigger. How did we end up with so many genres? And for people like me, when did ecchi and fan service become more well-known? So to start from the beginning, there was first shonen, which was for the boys, and shojo for the girls. Differentiation. Again, like I've said before, does not have to be strictly cut that way. If you like shojo manga, you don't have to be a girl. Just like you don't have to be a boy to like shonen. But like most entertainment, these beginning series tended to reflect the current climate and culture around the globe. So think about late 1960s was the time when we were still deep into the Cold War. and the locations and settings and narrative tended to show what was at the heart of some of the complex issues becoming more mainstream. If you want to find a hard line of distinction, shonen, like I've said before, is more militaristic in its perspective and typically has a lot more fighting and action. Now, this is similar to how we see the different global superpowers affecting our daily lives. So shonen, in its heart of hearts, was trying to elaborate and artistically show how helpful and destructive technology can be. Now on the other side, shojo was more focused on life struggles and would begin the familiar girls/women growing into their adolescence and adulthood and how they navigate that while being a strong person who helps those around them. Both of these genres could go as serious or as silly as you can think. Think of coming of age archetype. That's the typical thing we see in most all of anime and manga. Over time, though, we see the development of these genres branching in all sorts of different styles and narrative imagery storytelling that they use. You could put any of these still into their heading or titles of shojo or shonen, but then you have the development of subgenres, and even two different age groups being normalized into mainstream. So think of genres like romance, superheroes, daily life, realistic fiction, and you can start to see where most of them start to fall into their age/gender categories. So now we're going to start talking about the different types of publications and where those age gaps are cut off and what types of differentiation they can make between entertainment. So we have kodomo. So that's like children's anime. So this is when anime or manga is directed towards children. I think of like Blue's Clues or Barney or something like that, but they have kodomo. So there are male and female publications. So they have Puchigumi, which are typically female magazines for children, and then Koro Koro Comic Special, which is for boys or males. And then we have shonen manga, which we know as like boys comics. But this was romanized as shonen or shounen or soyonen, and I'm definitely saying that one wrong. But as an editorial category of Japanese comics targeting an audience of adolescent boys. Think of Astro Boy 1951. Then we have shoujo manga, typically girls manga, and this is romanized as shoujo or shoujo. This is the editorial category of Japanese comics targeting adolescent females. Think of Saze-san in 1946. Then when we start to develop more different types of genres like seinen manga. This is an editorial category in Japanese comics marketed towards young men. The first magazine was published in 1956. There's also a kind of another title of seinen, which is seijin, which is very interchangeable sometimes. But with seijin, this is specifically more that pornographic type of comic. Can be interchangeable and sometimes becomes more of the semantic. Japanese use different kanji for two closely allied, meaning seinen, which is youth or young man. The second referring to that kind of pornographic manga aimed at grown men, adult majority. So also called seijin. And then we have josei, which is women's comics, also known as ladies comics. Its abbreviation, Redikomi, or Lady Kami, is a category of Japanese comics that emerged in the 1980s. In a strict sense, josei refers to manga marketed to an audience of adult women, contrasting shoujo manga, which is marketed to an audience of girls and young adult women. As I said briefly before, I want to finish this video where and when did ecchi, or fan service, debut. So this debuted in 1968 through the series Harenchi Gakuen, which is translated to Shameless School. So this was published from 1968 all the way to 1972. At the time of publication, this was technically released as a shonen, but is widely considered the first ecchi series. So there again, you can see that blur between age genres. first couple of chapters have no real nudity, really. Only exposed butts. But later, especially ending chapters, have girls with chest exposed, showing their nipples. The first ecchi in history, beginning in the first issue of Weekly Shonen Jump, Chapter 2, the nature of the content is very extreme, with both teachers and students being involved in perverted situations. Over the publication, Go Nagi included more extreme content at the encouragement of his editor. As the manga continued its serialization, it garnered more and more controversy from parents. As a result, certain PTA groups sort of forced the Jump editorial department to almost cancel the series. Nagai, in response to the controversy, decided to end off the manga in a very infamous harenchi war, or the Shameless War arc. Shameless School was controversial in Japan and is regarded as a traumatic work by several news publications. So what you're seeing on the screen is one of the animes that they made, and this was the direct-to-video OVA that was the Heisei Harenchi Gakuen. And it also was made into 4 live-action films, and there was 27 episodes as an anime. Most of this OVA that's online that I can only find is very graphic, and I could only really edit out this part. So thank you for watching all of that. That was my first ever video I ever made like that, so thank you for sticking through the end. I know probably some of that was a little cut bad, or I don't know if it made sense, or if it was too quick, or too many words. I should have read it. By the end of it, I just wanted to be done, so I didn't want to re-edit stuff. So I know you just have to kind of be done when you have a long video like that. So just to kind of finish, one of the first animes I ever watched all the way through, start to finish as a kid, was Yu Yu Hakusho. And this Blu-ray box is really awesome. So I highly suggest any person who, if it's still out there, I don't even know. I'm sure it is, but it was like $100. I forget. It was totally worth it. Because I watched it all the way through when I had my new baby, and I was feeding her and taking care of her as a newborn, and just had this in the background, and it was definitely saved my sanity. And then one of the first manga I ever read, I don't want to drop it, is Berserk, and I read that online. So if you haven't read that, you're crazy. I don't know where the hell you've been, but definitely read that. The manga is the way to go, because that's the original, and it actually completes, unlike the anime. In 97, which actually, now that I think about it, I remember when I was watching anime, and I just finished Yu Yu Hakusho, and I remember back in the day, my dad rented my brothers and I Berserk in Blockbuster, and man, that was another kind of turning point too. So that's why I wanted to read it later in life, because I realized, oh crap, it's actually finished. And so once I had that taste as a kid from that rental at Blockbuster, and then I read it as a young adult, I was hooked. I couldn't stop collecting manga, and I got so many in the back behind me, and I got a lot of Blu-rays and DVDs, and so yeah, I'm just really excited to make these videos. It was fun, but it was challenging, so I expect to get better and keep making more videos, because it's going to be my hobby, and we'll see how far it can go or how good I can get. But yeah, just let me know what your favorite series that inspired you to kind of become an otaku, but then or even what manga inspired you, or what you're reading right now, what you're watching right now. So yeah, look forward to more anime and manga stuff, because I mean, I can't get enough of it. I read all the time. So and I played a lot of video games, so you'll probably see some video game stuff too. So yeah, catch you later. On the flip side, this has been Seinen Sanctuary. Over and out.